The air in the processing floor was thick with the coppery scent of raw meat and the sharp tang of industrial cleaner. It clung to the back of Bianca's throat. The low hum of the refrigeration units was a constant, heavy drone that vibrated through the soles of her practical, steel-toed boots. This was her first day, her first hour, shadowing Enzo Bellini through the heart of his empire. Bellini meets. She was told it would be quiet, a simple walkthrough, a formality. She felt the shift before she heard it. A subtle change in the resonance of the concrete beneath her feet, the kind of tremor that meant heavy bodies were moving fast where they should not be. She had been hired, the middleman said, because she was invisible. A woman of her size was not what people expected when they pictured a bodyguard. They saw soft curves and assumed slowness a liability. They would look right past her. That was the theory. However, the 4 men who appeared from behind a row of hanging carcasses were not looking past her. They were looking straight at Enzo, and their hands held weapons that were not meant for butchering livestock. The first shot was deafening in the cavernous, tiled room. It ricocheted off a steel girder with a high-pitched scream. Enzo's 2 other men moved instantly, forming a useless wall of tailored suits. They were armed, but they were reacting. Bianca was already in motion. She did not draw a weapon. Her body was the weapon. She put her considerable weight between Enzo and the nearest gunman. Her movement not a clumsy shove but a calculated, hip-checking slam that sent him crashing into a stainless steel table. The gun skittered across the wet floor. Before he could recover, she brought the heel of her boot down on his wrist with a sickening crunch. 1 down. She felt a strange calm settle over her, the familiar focus that came when chaos erupted. The world narrowed to angles, trajectories, and centers of gravity. The second man came at her, swinging the butt of his rifle. A foolish move. He was off balance, overcommitted. She pivoted, letting the momentum of his swing carry him past her, and drove her elbow backward into the soft space below his ribs. The air left him in a ragged gasp. She hooked her arm around his neck, using her entire body weight to drag him down, his own mass working against him until he collapsed into a heap at her feet. She looked up, her breathing steady, her gaze sweeping the room. Enzo's men had engaged the other 2 attackers, a frantic exchange of gunfire echoing off the walls. But the immediate threat to Enzo was gone, neutralized by her in less than 10 seconds. She turned to face her new employer. Enzo Bellini was not looking at the fight. He was looking at her. His dark eyes, usually cold and calculating, held a flicker of something else. Something that was not shock but assessment. Problem being solved. She thought she was here for a trial run. A strange but lucrative one-day gig. She was wrong. This was not a trial. It was an audition, and she had just passed. The doors to this world had just slammed shut behind her, and Enzo Bellini was the one holding the key. He did not speak until they were in the sterile silence of his office, a sleek, modern box of glass and steel overlooking the kill floor. The distant sounds of the cleanup were muted, unreal. His other 2 men, Johnny and Leo, stood by the door, their faces a mixture of awe and bruised pride. Bianca stood in the center of the room, feeling the blood, not her own, cooling on her knuckles. She was waiting to be dismissed, to be paid, to walk away from the smell of bleach and iron. "They told me you were a bouncer at a club in the Bronx," Enzo said. His voice was a low baritone, calm and measured, as if they were discussing the price of beef. "For a time," Bianca answered, her own voice even. She would not give him more than he asked for. "They neglected to mention your methods," he continued, his eyes tracing the line of her shoulders, the solid set of her stance. It was not a lecherous gaze. It was the look of a craftsman examining a tool. "You use your size. It's there. It'd be a waste not to." A corner of his mouth almost twitched. It was not a smile. It was the barest hint of one, gone before it could fully form. "My previous head of security was a man named Marco. He was fast. He was decorated. He was also a trader who sold my brother to the Falcone family for a percentage of their new shipping routes." The name hung in the air. The Falcones. The men on the floor. Bianca's blood ran a little colder. This was not some random smash and grab. This was a war. The men you hired me through, she said, connecting the dots. They work for you. They do, Enzo confirmed. And they brought me a dozen candidates. All men. All with the same pedigree as Marco. All of them predictable. He leaned forward, his hands resting flat on the wide mahogany desk. A heavy gold signet ring on his right pinky was the only ornament. You are not predictable, Bianca. The job is yours. Permanently. It was not an offer. It was a statement of fact. She had a small apartment, an estranged sister in another state, and a life that was quiet and her own. She had planned to take this money and disappear for a while, find work somewhere far from the city. But the look in his eyes told her that her plans were now irrelevant. I'm not sure I'm interested in a permanent position, she said carefully. Your interest is not a factor, he replied, his voice losing its conversational tone and hardening into something absolute. You saw what happened today. You are now a part of what happened today. The Falcons do not leave loose ends. Outside that door, you are a target. Inside my world, you are an asset. You are protected. You will be paid 5 times what you were quoted for today, every week. You will have a room at my estate. Your choice is between a long life of service to me, or a very short life of service to no one. Choose. The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with the truth of his words. She had seen the men's faces. She had heard the name Falcone. There was no going back to her quiet apartment. There was no disappearing. She had walked through a door thinking it was a one-time job, a quick payday. But the door had locked behind her, and the only way forward was deeper into the room with the man who held all the power. The man whose life she had just saved, and in doing so had forfeited her own. Life at Enzo Bellini's estate was a study in contradictions. The grounds were immaculate, acres of manicured lawn rolling down to the water, enclosed by a stone wall that was both beautiful and brutally effective. The house itself was a fortress of dark wood, marble, and bulletproof glass. It was silent, orderly, and suffocating. Bianca's room was larger than her entire apartment, with a private bathroom and a view of the gray, churning sound. Felt like a gilded cage. Her job was simple. Where Enzo went, she went. She was his shadow, a constant, solid presence at his back. To the other men in his crew, she was an anomaly. They watched her with a mixture of respect and suspicion. She did not eat with them in the mess hall. She ate in the main kitchen, after Enzo was finished, a plate prepared for her by the silent, severe housekeeper. She was part of the machine but not one of them. Enzo rarely spoke to her directly. He gave orders through his underboss, Johnny, the man whose pride she had wounded on that first day. But she felt his eyes on her constantly. When she stood guard outside a meeting, she would see him glance toward the door. When she drove him, his gaze in the rearview mirror would linger for a moment too long. He was still assessing her, still measuring her. One evening, she stood post outside his study. The heavy oak doors were closed, but the voices inside were raised. It was Enzo and Johnny. It was Marco's intel, Johnny was saying, his voice tight with frustration. He set up the drop point. He knew the security rotation. He walked my cousin Paolo right into their guns. Marco is dead. Enzo's voice was dangerously low. And Paolo is dead because I trusted the wrong man. I will not make that mistake again. So you trust her? Johnny shot back. This woman? We know nothing about her. We know she can handle herself, Enzo countered. We know she does not flinch. We know the Falcons looked right through her until it was too late. That is more than I knew about Marco in 10 years. There was a pause. Bianca held her breath, her back pressed against the cool wall of the hallway. She should move away, but she was rooted to the spot. He was family. Enzo, Johnny's voice was softer now, filled with a grief that felt raw. Paolo was your brother. Loyalty is family, Enzo replied, and the finality in his tone ended the conversation. Nothing else. The words settled in Bianca's chest, heavy as stone. His wound was not just betrayal. It was guilt. He carried the weight of his brother's death, a failure he was determined never to repeat. That was why he watched her. He was not just looking for a competent bodyguard. He was looking for someone whose loyalty was absolute because they had nothing else to offer, nowhere else to go. He was looking for someone like her. Weeks bled into a month. The rhythm of her new life became familiar. The quiet tension, the constant vigilance, the weight of the unspoken. The Falcones were quiet, too quiet. Enzo grew more restless. He took meetings at odd hours, in places that were not his own territory. A restaurant in Little Italy, a warehouse in Red Hook, a tailor shop in the garment district. Each location was a calculated risk. One rainy Tuesday, they were leaving a meeting at a fish market on the docks. The air smelled of salt and diesel. Enzo was walking ahead of her, flanked by Leo and Johnny, moving toward the black sedan she had waiting. Bianca scanned the area, her eyes sweeping over the stacks of crates, the fishing boats bobbing in the murky water, the few stevedores finishing their shifts. Everything seemed normal, too normal. She saw it then, a glint of light from the rooftop of an adjacent warehouse. Not a reflection from the rain. It was the distinct, momentary flash of a scope. There was no time to shout a warning. She closed the distance to Enzo in 3 long strides, her mind a blank slate of pure instinct. She did not shove him down. Instead, she wrapped one arm around his chest, hooking the other under his legs, and used her momentum and his own forward motion to lift and pivot, putting her body between him and the warehouse. It was a fireman's carry, modified and brutal. He was a heavy man, solid muscle, but her center of gravity was low and her legs were strong. For a split second, they were a tangle of limbs, his expensive wool coat bunched in her fist, the scent of cedar and his clean soap filling her senses. The rifle shot cracked through the air a half-second later. It slammed into her side, a fiery, tearing pain that stole her breath. Felt like being hit with a sledgehammer. The force of it sent them both stumbling sideways, crashing behind the relative safety of the sedan. The world tilted, the gray sky spinning above her. More shots erupted as Johnny and Leo returned fire. The sound was muffled, distant. Bianca's focus was on the spreading warmth in her side, the sticky dampness soaking through her jacket. She had gotten him clear. That was all that mattered. Enzo scrambled up, his face a mask of cold fury. He dragged her fully behind the car, his hands surprisingly gentle as he pushed her down. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low growl. He looked at the blood blooming on her side, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his composure, a flash of something that looked like fear. He drew his own weapon, leaning around the hood of the car to add his fire to the fight. Bianca lay on the wet asphalt, the pain in her side a throbbing, insistent drum. She could have left. Weeks ago, she had seen an opportunity. A service gate left open while the gardeners were working. She could have walked out and never looked back. But she had stayed. She had stayed and warned Johnny about a blind spot in the camera coverage on the west wall. She had stayed because leaving felt more dangerous than remaining at the side of the most dangerous man she had ever met. Now, lying in a puddle of her own blood, she understood that she had made a choice that day, a choice she could never unmake. The world came back into focus in a sterile, white room that was not a hospital. And 4 was taped to the back of her hand, feeding a slow, clear drip into her veins. Her side was a landscape of dull, aching fire, tightly bandaged. A man she did not know, with the weary eyes of a doctor who did not ask questions, was packing a black leather bag. "The bullet went clean through," he said without looking at her. "Missed everything important. You're lucky. You'll be sore for weeks." No heavy lifting, he gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "I'll leave the painkillers on the table. Take them," then he was gone, leaving her alone in the silent bedroom. It was a safe house, one of Enzo's many anonymous properties scattered across the 5 boroughs. This one was a high-rise apartment with a sweeping view of the city lights, a glittering cage far from the estate. She pushed herself into a sitting position, a groan escaping her lips. The door opened and Enzo walked in. He was out of the blood-spattered suit, dressed in a simple black sweater and dark trousers. He held a glass of water, which he set on the bedside table next to the bottle of pills. He did not speak. He just stood there, watching her, his dark eyes unreadable. "The shooter?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Gone," he said. "A Falcone soldier. He won't be a problem again." The words were delivered with a chilling finality. He pulled a chair over from the corner of the room and sat down, a few feet from the bed. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with things they could not say. He was not a man who offered thanks. He was not a man who showed gratitude. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally, his voice quiet. "It's my job," she replied, the words tasting like ash. It was more than a job now. They both knew it. "My brother Paolo," he began, and the name sounded strange. A piece of a world he never shared. He was reckless. He trusted everyone. He thought loyalty was given, not earned. He died because he believed the world was better than it is. Enzo looked down at his hands, at the signet ring that seemed to suddenly carry an immense weight. "I am not my brother." "I know," she said. He looked up, and his eyes met hers. The distance between them seemed to vanish. The room was no longer a room, but a small, isolated space containing only the two of them. "You see things the way they are, Bianca. Not the way you wish they would be." It was not a compliment. It was not an observation. It was a confession. He was acknowledging a darkness in her that mirrored his own, a pragmatism that bordered on ruthless. He was telling her that he saw her, truly saw her, for the first time. And she did not look away. She did not deny it. Her silence was an answer, a confession of her own. In that moment, something shifted between them. The line that defined their roles as employer and employee dissolved, replaced by a more dangerous, more intricate connection. A bond forged in blood and sealed in the quiet understanding that they were the same kind of survivor. The Falcones had made a mistake. They had assumed Enzo Bellini's new bodyguard was just muscle. By targeting him and hitting her, they had revealed her importance. They had made her a target in her own right. This new reality settled over Bianca's slow recovery at the safe house. Enzo refused to move her back to the estate, claiming the risk was too high. The truth, she suspected, was that he wanted her close, isolated from the politics and potential leaks within his own organization. He was a constant, unnerving presence. He would bring her meals himself, waving away the housekeeper. He would sit in the chair by her bed and work on his laptop in silence for hours. He never touched her, never offered words of comfort, but his proximity was a statement. She was his to protect, his responsibility. The intimacy of it was more potent than any physical contact. One afternoon, he brought her a burner phone. "There is one person on the outside you might need to contact," he said, his tone flat. "A clean phone. Untraceable." He meant her sister, Sarah. They hadn't spoken in over a year. Not since Bianca had taken a security job that involved breaking a client's cheating husband's jaw. Sarah was a schoolteacher in a small town upstate. She lived in a world of PDA meetings and bake sales, a world that had no room for the casual violence Bianca inhabited. "I don't have anyone," Bianca lied. Enzo's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew she was lying, but he did not push. He simply left the phone on the table. "If you do, the Falcones will find them. They will look for any leverage, any weakness. It is what I would do." His words were a cold premonition. A week later, as the fire in her side had faded to a persistent ache, Johnny arrived at the apartment, his face pale. He handed Enzo a tablet without a word. On the screen was a grainy security camera photo. It was of her sister, Sarah, walking out of a grocery store. Standing by a black car parked across the street was a man Bianca recognized from the docks, one of the Falcone soldiers who had gotten away. The air left Bianca's lungs. Rage, cold and pure, washed over her. They had crossed a line. "They want a meeting," Johnny said. "They'll trade the girl for a ceasefire on the shipping lanes. They want you to come alone, Enzo." "It's a trap," Bianca said, her voice hard as steel. She was already on her feet, the pain in her side forgotten. They won't have her there. They'll have a kill team. They're using her to get to you. She is right, Enzo said, his gaze fixed on the photo. He looked from the image of the terrified woman on the screen to Bianca's face, which was now a mask of murderous resolve. They miscalculated. They think she is my weakness. They do not realize she is yours. Give me 2 men, Bianca said. It was not a request. Not your best shooters. I want drivers. Men who can handle a vehicle under pressure. I'll handle the rest. Enzo studied her. He saw the lethal certainty in her eyes. He saw a plan already forming behind them. He was a man who commanded, who dictated, who never relinquished control. But in that moment, he saw in her the same absolute focus he saw in himself before a battle. You will not go alone, he stated. I won't be, she said. You'll be 2 blocks away with the rest of your men, waiting for my signal. They want you, Enzo. Let's give them what they want. She then laid out the plan. It was simple, brutal, and relied on one thing, the Falcons underestimating her. They expected Enzo to be emotional, predictable. They did not expect him to hand control of the situation to the large, quiet woman they still saw as little more than a human shield. The meeting point was an abandoned warehouse district in Brooklyn. The air was thick with the smell of decay and stagnant water. Bianca drove one of the sedans herself, with Leo riding shotgun, his face grim. Enzo was where she had told him to be, listening on a secure comms line. She pulled up to the designated warehouse, the single building with lights on. As she predicted, they had snipers on the roofs. As she also predicted, they were watching the wrong car. The second sedan, driven by Enzo's other man, was pulling up a block away, creating a diversion. They see you, Enzo's voice crackled in her ear. A low, tense whisper. I know, she said. She got out of the car, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Her side protested with a dull throb, but she ignored it. Rico Falcone, a man with slicked back hair and a cruel smile, stepped out of the warehouse, flanked by 4 of his men. Where's Bellini? Did he send his bitch to do his negotiating? He's waiting for proof of life, Bianca said calmly, her eyes scanning the men, their positions, their weapons. Show me my sister. Falcone laughed. You're not in a position to make demands. He nodded to one of his men, who shoved Sarah out of the doorway. Her sister's face was tear-streaked, her eyes wide with terror. She saw Bianca and a fresh wave of sobs shook her. That was the signal, not for Enzo's men but for Leo. He threw open his passenger door, providing a sliver of cover, and opened fire not at Falcone, but at the base of a precariously stacked pile of rusty oil drums just inside the warehouse entrance. The crashing sound was deafening. It was the chaos Bianca needed. As Falcone's men instinctively turned toward the noise, Bianca moved. She lunged forward, closing the distance to Rico Falcone in a heartbeat. She ignored his gun, grabbing the wrist of his gun hand with one of her own and his throat with the other. She lifted him, his feet dangling for a second, and slammed him back against the corrugated metal wall of the warehouse. The impact shuddered through the structure. She put her face close to his, her voice a low, vicious promise. You wanted a war. You have 1 inch. She drove her knee into his side, hard, then used his body as a shield as she dragged him back toward the car. His men too stunned to get a clean shot. That is when Enzo's men descended. It was not a firefight. It was an execution. Surgical and swift. Within a minute it was over. The silence that fell was more shocking than the noise. Bianca shoved the gasping, whimpering Rico Falcone toward Johnny, who handled him with cold efficiency. She walked over to her sister, who was huddled on the ground, shaking. Bianca took off her own jacket and wrapped it around Sarah's shoulders. It's over. You're safe, Bianca said. Sarah looked up at her, at the cold-eyed men, at the bodies on the pavement. She looked at Bianca, and there was no relief in her eyes. There was only horror. What have you become? She whispered. The words struck Bianca harder than the bullet had. Back at the estate, the victory felt hollow. Sarah had been sent upstate in an armored car with enough money to disappear and start a new life. A life that would never again include her sister. The bridge to her old world was not just burned. It was annihilated. Cost had been paid. Bianca stood by the large window in Enzo's study, staring out at the dark water. The door opened and closed softly. Enzo came to stand beside her, not too close, but near enough that she could feel the heat from his body. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the events of the night, with the choices that had led them here. "She is safe," he said finally. It was not an apology, but an acknowledgement of her sacrifice. "I know," Bianca replied, her voice flat. "In my world," he said, turning to face her, "nothing is given. Everything is taken or earned. Loyalty, respect, power. It all comes at a price." He looked at her, and the coldness in his eyes was gone, replaced by an intensity that held her fast. "Anyone who is yours is mine to protect. That is my oath." It was the closest he would ever come to a declaration. It was more binding than any whispered promise, more real than any profession of love. It was a statement of fact, a realignment of his world with her at its center. He walked over to the bar and poured 2 glasses of a dark, amber liquid. He did not ask if she wanted one. He walked back and set one down on the table beside her hand. A simple, profound gesture of inclusion. He was not her boss anymore. She was not his bodyguard. They were something else, something forged in violence and defined by a shared, dangerous understanding of the world. She looked from his unreadable face to the glass. She picked it up. The crystal was heavy, cool against her skin. The weight of it familiar and new all at once. It was the weight of her choice, a choice she had made the moment she stood between him and a bullet, a choice she would have to carry from now on. She raised the glass to her lips, the sharp, burning taste of the whiskey a welcome fire in the cold emptiness of what she had lost, and what she had just irrevocably gained.